How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today on Monday, February 3rd, it is officially the week of the Super Bowl, the week leading into the big game. We'll finally know who will lift the Lombardi Trophy after the conclusion of this upcoming Sunday's game. Both teams are already down there in New Orleans. It's the start of media week down there as well. So throughout the week, we're going to learn a lot more, as the days go on and the players are down there answering a bunch of questions, obviously leading into the Super Bowl, obviously. So as that goes along, we'll follow it and I'm sure discuss it as we go along. But on today's show, we're going to talk about some other pretty relevant news around the NFL, starting with Myles Garrett officially requesting a trade from the Cleveland Browns. We'll go into that first on today's show. Then we'll look at Chip Kelly's return to the NFL after reportedly the Raiders have agreed to hire Chip Kelly as their new offensive coordinator. Plus, more news on Kellen Moore as well in regards to a new opportunity as a head coach. So those things are coming up on today's show. And other than sticking to the show and watching more on the episodes and more on the segments that we have coming up, I have to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments during today's show, any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share on anything we discuss, please don't hesitate to do so. Your insight and input is always a big part of what makes this show great, and we always look forward to getting your guys' perspective on anything that we talk about, just to add to the conversation as well. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on any of these live shows, there's an easy way to do that just by using the Super Chat feature. Click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. Again, we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, share what's on your mind during these live shows, click the Super Chat button, and let us know anything in regards to any topics during these live shows. So you guys have that open to you during any of these live shows as well. But now we can start with our first segment on today's show, the biggest piece of news that I, for one, wasn't expecting to talk about at all, because it was sort of floated as a pretty unlikely topic, I think, a couple weeks ago, where I know we talked about it, and the talk surrounding Myles Garrett, the Cleveland Browns, and there was a point, almost like a month ago now, where Myles had some comments to make about not wanting to be part of a rebuild or anything like that in Cleveland, and then it seemed to have transpired into an area where, I don't know, like the Browns general manager, Andrew Berry, and Myles Garrett seemed to have come to an agreement on the future going forward, and it seemed like Myles Garrett was okay with it, right? He signed off on it, but not according to the news today, right? The news that dropped this morning was that Myles Garrett officially requested a trade out of the Cleveland Browns. A pretty public request, right? I think he just posted something on his social media rather than, any insiders reporting on a one-to-one conversation that Myles Garrett had with the Browns. I'm sure he let them know, but he also made it pretty publicly known that he wanted to look for a new chapter past the Cleveland Browns now at this point in his career. And in his statement that he posted this morning, one of the things that Myles Garrett said was, "While I've loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stage won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to be from Cleveland to Canton. It was always been compete and win a Super Bowl." And Garrett, obviously, when you think of Myles Garrett and that statement as well, I think it plays into the idea that he's been very successful, very efficient during his 8 years there with the Cleveland Browns. He's been a 6-time Pro Bowler. He won the Defensive Player of the Year last season, double-digit sacks every year except his rookie year, and he finished this past season with 14 sacks and a career high 40 solo tackles in 2024. But the thing that you noticed that I mentioned in all those things I just said about Myles Garrett was he had won the Defensive Player of the Year. He had double-digit sacks. He's a six-time Pro Bowler. It's all mainly individual. There's not a lot of we or the Browns or as a collective unit. So, that's obviously one of the biggest reasons, right? Myles is looking to just go past the individual accolades and just be known as this amazing Hall of Fame pass rusher, which I'm sure he will be. It's a lot more important to him than that, obviously, right? And, with the Browns, it's materialized into a situation where it just seems a bit more clouded, a bit more uncertain for Myles Garrett, and now we're at this point right now with the Browns, right? You look at their quarterback situation, has a lot of question marks around it. They only won 3 games this past season after making the playoffs the year before. Very disappointing, obviously, and he's 29 years old. He's going to be 30 years old at the end of this year, around December 29th. So it's not like he could just sit around maybe for like another, 4 years or something like that for the Browns to really be a contending team. He might feel like, the time is now, right? He is at the peak of his career, most likely, it seems like, and he wants to take advantage of that now. So you get a moment like this, right? The trade request coming in and Myles really wanting to compete, like he said, at the biggest stage and trying to win a Super Bowl. So we mentioned before how it was a bit strange because it felt like it was going one way, and now you get this, and it completely sends you the other way. General Manager Andrew Berry for the Cleveland Browns also touched on this, I think, maybe a couple weeks ago when they asked him about it again, and he said that he wouldn't trade Myles Garrett for 2 first-round picks, and rather he wanted to talk about a contract extension with Myles rather than any sort of trade scenario. And for any of you wondering, the contract situation with Garrett is he signed a 5-year contract, or a 5-year extension, I should say, back in 2020. So he still has 2 years left on that deal. So there's a little bit of urgency there, right? You can start talking about extensions, but it's not like he's going to become a free agent next season, and you need to figure this out quickly, right? The Browns, I'm sure, still don't feel any urgency from the contract aspect of things, right? So, yes, they would love to extend it, but I don't think Myles is really interested in making that decision to extend with the Browns, but rather, getting to a spot where hopefully the Browns would like to trade him, right? And that's where this situation kind of gets pretty interesting because of the fact that there's 2 years remaining on that deal, the Browns really don't have to do anything. And they said today, actually, according to Mike Garafolo, that they saw the statement, right? They acknowledge that Myles, wants to be traded, but they don't feel any urgency, or they don't plan on accommodating his desires, right? They don't plan on trading him. So this is where it becomes kind of interesting, and it could turn a little bit ugly, right? Because what is Myles Garrett willing to do to get traded, right? What's his level of urgency? Is he wanting to get traded no matter what this offseason, right? Is he going to hold out and drag this thing on during the regular season? Of course, we're very, very far from, that date, right? We're already talking about the start of next season. But, this thing could drag on, especially for a player like Myles Garrett. This could be a monumental trade, sort of like the one that Khalil Mack was involved in when he was 27 years old, being traded from the Raiders to the Chicago Bears. There was a lot that went into that trade, and he was younger than Myles Garrett. So, that is really where we're at now. How far is this going to go before, it gets really ugly and it gets really, like, I guess you could say out of hand in some respect, but, personally, I guess I do understand it. Because, like, Garrett's been there for a while now, and they've been close, but it always feels like it's gone, like, up and down with the Browns, right? It always feels like they're never quite ready to be, like, a perennial playoff team. So I do understand the frustrations, and I do understand Garrett believing in himself that, he's in stake for a lot of more success in his career, right? He probably feels like he has a lot more to give and a lot more to contribute rather than, winning 3 games or just being on the outside looking in more likely than not. And the quarterback position is obviously a huge thing, right? Because if you don't have that, then you're not really going to be considered a true contender, despite, the Browns being a good defense and being a decent offense, on their best day, they can hang around. So that's where I do understand it from Myles Garrett's point of view, right? He definitely feels like he should be contributing a lot more. Anthony says, I'm not sure if the NFL is like the NBA, but do they have a no trade clause in their contract? I believe some people do. Like, I'm pretty sure, I forget who it was. I know the coaches definitely do. I know Mike Tomlin definitely has one. I believe Russell Wilson had one at some point in time, or he still had one before, or he still has one now. I'm not quite sure, but I'm almost certain that they also do in the NFL, so you can't just, go trading them just like that. And some players definitely do. I'll probably look it up at some point during this episode just to give an answer, but yeah, it's pretty crazy. I wasn't expecting this. I can't blame them again, but the Browns are in a tough spot now, right? Like, do you want to deal with an unhappy superstar like that? Do you entertain it in some respect and think like, well, we have the number 2 pick this year. If there was ever a spot where you realistically could trade Myles Garrett, nobody really wants to, but if you were to trade him this year, picking number 2 seems to be like the best opportunity for you to explore something like that with, a guy like Abdul Carter sitting there. If you are going to trade Myles, you get at least like 2 first-round picks for him, and you get to keep number 2 and get an immediate replacement, it seems like, in Abdul Carter from Penn State. That's my point of view. That's initially what I started thinking about if I was to trade Myles Garrett. And usually, situations like this don't really end up too well when, a player just wants to leave. More often than not, they're going to get their way, especially if it doesn't have to do with a contract. So I expect this to actually happen. When it happens, I'm not actually sure. Anthony, how about Myles Garrett to Miami? That would be nice. That would be great for them. But I feel like he's going to be very specific on where he wants to go. I'm sure he wants to go to a Super Bowl contending team. So you initially think the teams that made it this year, I think the Falcons didn't make the playoffs, but I think they would be an exciting opportunity, much like the Dolphins. You think of the Bills. It looks like they're going to move on from Von Miller, so Buffalo could be an option. The Buccaneers could be another one, right? A ascending team, I believe, to acquire a generational type of talent like that would be massive. The Detroit Lions, right? We said that their biggest need has always been pass rush. You compare Myles Garrett up with Aiden Hutchinson right away, and that would be the most devastating duo in the NFL instantly, by far. So Detroit's super interesting. The Commanders is another one. They got a lot of cap space, and they also need pass rushers to fortify that defensive line. That would be a no-brainer. The Packers is another one, interesting one, that definitely requires a lot more attention on getting to the quarterback. So there's a bunch of teams, honestly, and I don't think any team would be like, I'm good, I don't need Myles Garrett. I think all the teams would love to have Myles Garrett, but the ones that make the most sense, I think the Lions, the Commanders, the Bills, and I'll throw the Falcons in there as like my top 4. But this is still obviously the first step to it all. We still got a long ways away before we start talking about much more in terms of anything being materialized. So that's just the initial piece of this entire story, right? Myles Garrett officially requesting a trade this morning, so we'll see how this develops, I'm sure, over the course of the offseason. But as we stand here right now, we got some other news to talk about in regards to additions to certain teams. The Las Vegas Raiders made an addition to their coaching staff by bringing back Chip Kelly to the NFL. So we're going to discuss that, all the details about the news, and just giving our thoughts on it. What do we think Chip Kelly will do with the Las Vegas Raiders as their offensive coordinator in 2025? We'll give our answer when we return after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. 'Cause everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast here on Monday, February 3rd. If you missed the first segment, we just went over the biggest news of the day, Myles Garrett requesting a trade from the Cleveland Browns this morning. But over the weekend, we had another thing develop in the NFL with the Las Vegas Raiders. And usually, as things typically go, when any team wins a national championship, right, everyone comes snooping around for, new coaches. They come snooping around your coaching staff, and more often than not, very successful teams end up losing a coordinator here or there, and it might not seem like a big thing, but it's always, ends up being something of a lot of emphasis, I would say, because, I don't think coordinators get enough attention sometimes when you're talking about the whole collective group, and that's what Ohio State, must deal with now, that they won the national championship, and now both of their coordinators are moving on. A season after they had all this success, they won the first ever college football playoffs, the first ever 12-team pool, obviously. Now their former defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles, is joining Penn State as their new defensive coordinator. And now, according to ESPN, their offensive coordinator, Chip Kelly, has come to an agreement with the Raiders to become their new offensive coordinator. So Ryan Day is going to be looking for some new coordinators, both of them leaving him after this season. And to focus on Chip Kelly, returning to the NFL is some pretty big news. After only one season with the Buckeyes, Kelly is back as an offensive coordinator this time in the NFL, something he's actually not done at the NFL level. He's been a head coach, but not actually an offensive coordinator. His previous time in the NFL was in Philadelphia as one of the starting points, where he was a head coach from 2013 to 2015. He finished with a 26-21 record there in the 3 seasons that he had, but it was a 6-9 season, I believe, in his third year, where things, just kind of met a breaking point, and the two sides decided to go their separate ways. But then he moved on to be the head coach of the 49ers back in 2016, but he only lasted one season there because they were an abysmal 20-14. They won their first game in week 1, and then they lost 13 straight after that. So his time in San Francisco was a disaster as a head coach, and then after some time on television, I believe, then he went and joined up with the UCLA Bruins, became their head coach and whatnot, and he spent some time there before, coming to Ohio State and taking on their offensive coordinator duties this past season, right? So, you look at this past season and you look at the recent sort of body of work for Chip Kelly, and I think there was no better offense this year across the landscape of college football than Ohio State, and a lot of it, people will point to the talent, obviously, with Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Will Howard played pretty well, Quinshawn Judkins, Travion Henderson, all these guys having a lot to do with that, right? The personal talent and individual skill set shouldn't be overlooked, but I think Chip Kelly also coming in and implying his ideas, his offensive scheme, and things like that to this group, I think really made a difference, getting them over that hurdle of falling in the big games and just falling short of the moment. I think he had a big part to do in that, and how unstoppable this offense really looked as well. So with that, I think, with that in mind, it's exciting that you hire someone coming off of that amount of success, right, with Ohio State. And I also saw Jeremiah Smith, the freshman wide receiver, react to Chip Kelly leaving, and it seemed like it was a pretty big deal. Obviously, like, he held Chip Kelly in high regard, and he didn't want him to leave. So you can take that and the body of work that he put out there in college football this past season, and it's exciting to bring in a guy like that, Chip Kelly, who has been mentioned as a offensive mind, a very creative and I guess what's the word? A very creative and I guess just innovative offensive mind. I think that was the idea when he came into Philadelphia. It didn't really work out as a head coach, but I think, like we've typically talked about in some of these cases with head coaching and offensive coordinators, or just really any coordinators in general, you got some guys that can do both, that can take a promotion, that can really transition seamlessly into being a head coach, but then other guys, it just doesn't really suit them, and that's all right. But some guys like Josh McDaniels, I'll throw Chip Kelly in there, Arthur Smith, Jeff Ulbrich a little bit in his short sample time as a interim head coach. I'd say he's a better coordinator. I'm trying to think of anybody else that comes to my mind just right off the top of my head. I can't really think of anybody else. Those are the ones that really jump out at me. A lot of them on the offensive side, but there's no problem with that. I just think it's a matter of, I guess, just accepting it, right? That some guys are just better coordinators, and I think Chip Kelly can kind of fit into that, group of people as well. As a head coach, might not have worked out. It doesn't for a lot of people, and I think as an offensive coordinator, it could go a lot better if Chip Kelly just has to focus on the offensive side of the ball and making sure that this group plays to the best of their abilities week in and week out. But with that being said, he's not walking into a plethora of riches in Las Vegas, right? Not by any means. He's not walking into a room full of 5-star recruits or anything like that, right? There's only a few 5-star players, you would say, on this team. So it's going to be one of his biggest tests. It's one of the biggest challenges across the NFL on how the Raiders in this new era with Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly and these guys kind of turn the situation around for the Raiders, and also led by Tom Brady, Mark Davis, and those guys upstairs. This is a very, very infant level project that it is at right now, right? It's still in the infant stage, right? They don't really have a lot of a foundation yet, right? A lot of new players coming in, a lot of new coaches, new identity, just a whole really clean slate for this Las Vegas Raiders team. And with Chip Kelly, it's exciting that he now has the freedom, I'm sure, to kind of mold this thing how he wants to, but it's not going to be easy, just bringing in all the players you want, right? It's going to be a challenge to kind of bring them in free agency, but they do have one of the biggest cap spaces, or some of the most money in the NFL to spend. They actually have the second most cap space at $92.5 million. So that's great. Free agency is really going to be their area where they're going to go out there and try to acquire the players that they feel fit the mold of this team, right? There's a lot of good opportunities out there. Like, you think of a lot of great receivers out there, like Chris Godwin or T. Higgins, that are free agents, or some offensive linemen like Trey Smith is going to be a free agent. Ronnie Stanley is another one. Across the defensive line, if you wanted to reinforce that, you got Oza Adigizua from the Cowboys, Josh Sweat's a free agent, Khalil Mack, I also believe, is a free agent, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a bunch of options out there, right? And some of the biggest ones that stand out for the Raiders are mainly on the offensive side of the ball, I would say, quarterback being the biggest one. And I'm not sure if that's where you'd want to go in free agency for the quarterback. Hopefully they get someone like Shedeur Sanders in the first round at 6 if he's there, and that's a big if. But if he's there at 6, I think that would be the ideal scenario for Chip Kelly and this offense to try and get their future quarterback in their building. But other than that, I mean, you look at wide receivers, they have Jacoby Myers, which is solid, but they definitely need a lot more. Running backs, another one. That's a spot where you can look at guys like Najee Harris would be interesting, bringing him in. I think that's been mentioned a little bit, so how successful they'll be at bringing him in is a different story, but I've seen them being linked with him. Offensive line as well, again, just across the board, just improving that unit would go a long way, but they are very fortunate to have, already in the conversation for one of the best tight ends in Brock Bowers, right? He's the face of this team, I would say, right? Him and like Max Crosby, I would say, are both the faces of this team already. So building around him and having the wherewithal for Chip Kelly to really use him, and not only meeting his abilities, but exceeding those and getting him to play even better. And that seems kind of crazy to mention because of the historic season that he had, but it's only his first year, and the potential of Brock Bowers, I think, could be so much more if, again, met with the right coaching and the right game plan around it. So he could easily lead this offense and be the face of them, but how you support him, how you build around him is obviously the biggest factor around that. So very, very new still, this project with the Raiders, but they got their new head coach in Pete Carroll, their defensive coordinator staying around in Patrick Graham, and now they're bringing in the offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly. So they got the biggest parts of their coaching staff together. Now it'll be a lot more of detailed and very detailed and oriented, steps moving forward for this team, how they want to set it up, creating a game plan, creating a blueprint of what they want this team to look like, evidently, before they get to, the biggest part of the offseason, or at least the first part in free agency. So Chip Kelly there as the new guy, he'll be leading this offense, and we'll see if they could get to at least playing better than what they did last year, right? But the quarterback is obviously a big part of it, so we'll see where we go with the Raiders and Chip Kelly. That is that segment, so moving on from that now, heading into another break, but when we return, we're going to talk some more about some coaching in the NFL. Going back to a topic that we previously covered, more information has come out on the Saints and their interest in Kellen Moore, currently the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, but there has been some more development with him and the New Orleans Saints that we're going to discuss when we return after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to move on to our next segment, sticking to the coaching theme of today's episode, and much like, the first initial episodes are once we get more into the offseason, this time going back to the Saints and their interest in Eagles' current offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore. It's the week leading up to the Super Bowl now, and while other teams are moving forward already for next season in terms of, getting their plans underway, the Saints still look to close out finding their new head coach, right? They still need to close out the initial step of it all, right? Unlike the Bears, who are already moving forward. The Patriots have been moving forward, right? They were the first team to get their head coach under consideration. They already got Mike Vrabel. The Jaguars are moving on, right? Everybody's got their guy, their leader, to lead them into this new era. Other than the Saints, they still remain the team without a head coach up until this point. But the fact that they still don't have one, I think, leads us to last week's discussion about them and their interest in Kellen Moore, right, the Eagles' offensive coordinator. And Tom Pelissero from NFL Media reported over the weekend that the Saints general manager, Mickey Loomis, informed other head coaching candidates that they plan on continuing discussions with Kellen Moore about this head coaching opportunity that they have. And although they can't talk with Kellen Moore directly and actually have those discussions right now or hire him until the end of the Super Bowl, their general manager has let everybody else know that we're planning on moving forward with Kellen Moore a little bit more once the opportunity comes up. So it's not to kind of make anything official, right, according to these reports, but just like as a warning, as a inclination as to which way this thing is going, right, and which way the Saints are sort of favoring as they try and look for a new head coach, right? The discussions we had last week about, I believe this is carried out, the more likely that it is going to be Kellen Moore, I believe, because the Saints have options, right? They have interviewed guys like Mike Kafka from the Giants, Anthony Weaver from the Miami Dolphins. They've interviewed twice with them already. So if they wanted to hire someone, I'm sure Mike Kafka or Anthony Weaver would love the opportunity to be the head coach. But the way the Saints are moving, according to this latest report, the longer this carries out, the more closer we get to it actually being Kellen Moore. And, to some people, to some concerns that the Saints head coaching job might not be the most sought after or be the worst one in some people's eyes. I mean, when you start talking about things like that and, people bringing up the reports that Joe Brady and Mike McCarthy pulled themselves out of consideration because they just didn't want the job, maybe because they thought that it wasn't a good opportunity at the end of the day, so they decided to retreat and say, you know what, no thanks, I've thought about it more, I'm actually not interested. Some people would link that to the fact that, the Saints head coaching job just isn't a very attractive one, quite honestly. So, there are those sides of the story, and I think it's a pretty valid point. But if Kellen Moore also didn't think that it was a good position or a good opportunity for him, then he would have already said, I'm actually not interested, I'm just going to stay in Philadelphia. He would have already let people know that, right? So I'm not really buying the idea that nobody wants this job or the Saints are not going to have anybody to go to. They're going to have their options, and I think the fact that, again, it's going longer and that we haven't heard any official news from the Saints or any further interviews since last they talked with Kellen Moore last week, I think that's a very positive sign for the Saints in getting the guy that they ultimately want in Kellen Moore, right? The more this stays quiet, the more you can assume that it's going to be Kellen Moore because they can't make the announcement already because they're not allowed to, right? It would be interfering with teams actually playing in the Super Bowl. So they actually can't make anything up right now. So after the reports and things like that, and we saw Mike McCarthy and Joe Brady pull out, we got the news about Kellen Moore and how he was the latest and most recent interview for the New Orleans Saints, and we just haven't heard anything else from that since then, right? The decision's not official or anything like that. The Saints and their general manager, what's his name, Mickey Loomis, haven't made any decision official yet. They're just letting all the candidates know that this is kind of where their heads are at, basically. So it is what it is now. That's sort of being floated out there. And, do I think this Saints job is a good one? I don't think it's the best one. I think all the best ones are already taken up, right? Obviously. But I wouldn't say it's like the worst one. Because I think the Raiders one might be a little bit worse just because you don't really know, like where or what their plan is going to be, right? I feel like Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly, who we just finished talking about, are going to have a lot of a tougher time trying to figure out that team just in general and kind of turning the page into something that is a respectable, competitive project out there. I think the Saints have a little bit more of an advantage there, especially in a weaker division. Nobody talks about the fact that the Raiders are going to have to play potentially a 3-time Super Bowl champion in the Chiefs each year with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, obviously, Sean Payton, another legendary coach, and the job that he did in Denver. And then you also have Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers as an ascending team as well. That's also an aspect of this, right? The Saints are in a division with the Panthers, no offense, the Falcons, who didn't make the playoffs, and the Buccaneers, who also were in a tight division race as well with the Falcons. So this division is a lot more wide open, right? I think it could honestly be any of these 4 teams, right? The Panthers are probably the least favorite to win the division like this, but they showed some signs and they can give some people trouble. So this division is a lot more wide open. So that's why I also feel like this Saints job is not the worst, or it's just like a terrible job. There are certainly a lot of difficulties with it, if whether or not you like Derek Carr as your quarterback, or the fact that you only really have Chris Olave as one of the only real, like, bona fide weapons that you have on this team. Him and Alvin Kamara obviously are the main stages of this team, but then the offensive line could use some work. Other wide receivers other than just Chris Olave, right? You could make some improvements there as well. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it just feels like it's getting very much past their due date, right? It feels like they're a little bit older, a little bit more mature, almost just past their primes a little bit. So you gotta add some new players to kind of re-energize that group a little bit more, right? Get them to play like they did like 7 years ago or something like that, right? So they definitely have their own problems. They have their own things to kind of get over, but I don't think it's the worst job. I think the Raiders one, not the worst job, but it's the most difficult, I'd say, for the circumstances that I laid out. So with this, new development, there's also the possibility of Kellen Moore just deciding that he doesn't want it. What if after the Super Bowl, whether they win or lose, right, he kind of comes to a place where he decides, I kind of want to stay with the Eagles, right? Maybe this spot isn't for me. I'll stay with the Eagles one more season, and then we'll see where we're at in becoming a head coach. That's also a possibility, and I mean, if that were to happen, I'm sure the Eagles would be all right with going with Anthony Weaver or Mike Kafka. So, it wouldn't be the most ideal thing for the Saints to wait this long and then just go with their second or third option, but they have options, right? It's not like they're just going to have to go back to Darren Rizzi or something like that. I mean, they can. I think he's joining Sean Payton in Denver. So it's not as grave of a situation as it seems. The Saints also don't have a lot of cap space, so that makes it difficult. But overall, I think if Kellen Moore does end up getting this job like it looks like he is going to, I think this would be a pretty exciting opportunity for him because, there's not a lot of expectations, right? To come and be the head coach of a team with not a lot of expectations, not a lot of pressure, and get to coach guys like Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Cameron Jordan, and have a high draft pick as well. I think that's one of the most low maintenance, low expectation sort of situation that you could find nowadays in the NFL, right? Because the Bears are expected to get a lot better, right, and compete for that division. The Jaguars are also expected to play a lot better, and they're expected to turn Trevor Lawrence around rather quickly. The Jets is another one. In that market, everybody wants the results tomorrow. They want it immediately. So that's a lot more pressure that a new head coach is going to have to deal with, right? So I think barring that and, putting it into its context, I don't think this is a situation where Kellen Moore looks at it and thinks, like why would I want that job? I think this could be a very low risk kind of opportunity for Kellen Moore. And also I think it's important that the Saints acknowledge where they're at right now. They're not winning a Super Bowl, and they're probably not making the playoffs next season, but they got to acknowledge that and really think about this long term. Like, we got to give Kellen Moore some time and give him the resources to really build this team up, right? Not have such a short term, immediate sort of, success. He could turn this situation around. It's not as grave as everybody thinks it is. So once the news becomes official or not, we'll know a lot more probably around this time next week, next Monday or next Tuesday, whether Kellen Moore will be or will not be the head coach of the Saints. So by the time that comes around, we'll have moved on, much like we are on today's show with the last couple segments here. We're going to go back to the series we started last week, talking about the positions that I feel like some teams need to improve on in 2025. We already talked about the Packers and some spots I believe they need to upgrade at. Now we're going to stay in that division and move over to the Chicago Bears. Where do they need to make their biggest improvements? We'll answer that when we return after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are jumping back into the action now here on the show, and we're continuing our series that we started last week with talking about some of the early impressions, some of the early thoughts that we have on some areas of improvement that each team needs to make heading into the offseason. Still very early in the process, but I think for some teams, and really we're going to get to every team in the NFL, but the areas of improvement I think are pretty grave and pretty noticeable in some spots where we can already pick it out. And I think in a lot of these situations, it's quite honestly just this one spot where teams need to get it right. Not a lot of teams need everything, right, to improve. A lot of these exciting teams with, I think, a lot of potential are only just a move or two away from making, that sort of breakthrough. And most of the NFC North, that we started last week with the Packers and just looking ahead, most of the NFC North made their way to the playoffs this past season, except the Chicago Bears, right? They finished with a 5-12 record, but they hired Ben Johnson as their new head coach. And there's a lot of excitement around what Chicago can be going forward, right? Now that they got the big fish in the market, right? They brought in the most sought after coach on the market. They hired him. Now he's with them, and now they're very excited to kind of usher in this new era with getting a guy that they usually don't end up with, right? The Bears don't usually make that sort of move where they go out and get a Ben Johnson, right? Some people were fearing that they'd go elsewhere and get, not to diminish Mike McCarthy or anything like that, or Pete Carroll, but it wasn't who the Chicago Bears wanted. And luckily for them, they pulled the trigger, they hired Ben Johnson, and now we look forward to see where and what areas Ben Johnson should try to improve with this team. And like I mentioned before, with some teams, it's not really a lot. And I think the Bears fit that category where I think their biggest need is just each of the lines, the offensive line and the defensive line. I think just improving that would make a pretty big difference, obviously, for these teams, right? And it's pretty simple because Caleb was the most sacked quarterback this year. In his first year in the NFL, he got hit the most times, and that's not how you want to develop your rookie at all, right? There was no protection for him. He was running for his life more often than not and having to put on a Herculean effort on top of, just trying to learn what to do and what not to do in the NFL, right? That evolution, that development was sort of stunned when you can't protect your quarterback, right? The number one overall pick. They did a terrible job of trying to trying to protect him, quite honestly. So that needs to change. That's something that they need improvement on, more so than anything else, despite the fact that on the other side of the ball, Montez Sweat is their number one pass rusher, their main threat on the defensive line, and he only led the team with 5.5 sacks. So not that he's just like doing it all on his own, right? I don't want to diminish the rest of their players, but you need some more production from that. And I think you need to spread out the wealth a little bit more, because everyone's just focusing on Montez Sweat, rightly so, but you need some help along that defensive line to kind of make it more efficient, so not everybody can just double or triple cover Montez Sweat. You need some other sort of threat to also rush the passer and get after them as well. So with Ben Johnson coming over from the Lions, one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, this is a non-negotiable, I think, for him and this offense. And free agency will be the first opportunity that they'll have at improving both of them. And they're very fortunate, I think, that both free agency and this year's draft, at least the way it's kind of shaping out to be from what I've read from the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl, seems to be very prosperous at defensive line of one of the positions, or even offensive line a little bit as well. And like I mentioned, free agency, not to get to the draft so quickly yet, but free agency will be the first opportunity for the Bears, and I'd love for them to go after a guy like Trey Smith, the offensive guard for the Kansas City Chiefs. He is set to be a free agent this offseason. Him and the Chiefs haven't come to any sort of agreement quite yet, so the fact that could be an opportunity, and I think Trey Smith might be only like 26 or 27. He's not that old at all. Still coming off of that rookie deal, obviously. I think if you bring him in to the interior offensive line right away, if we're scoring this like out of 10 points, that brings you up to at least like a 4, just him. If we're starting from 0 and you just add a guy like Trey Smith, you're already at like halfway there, I think, or very close to it, because they've never really had an offensive lineman to the level of Trey Smith. And at this age, kind of entering his prime is super exciting and a great opportunity that I would love for the Bears to go after. Also, you got another guy like Ronnie Stanley, a little bit older. I think he's 31 years old, but if you feel like you need an improvement at the tackle position, bringing in a veteran like that on a short-term contract, right, could be another option that they could look at. And Ronnie Stanley's still a very solid tackle, but just a little bit older, right? So that could be something that they go after. You got a center, potentially, in Drew Dahlman from the Atlanta Falcons, who would be another option if they wanted to improve the center position, obviously, or maybe he can move around to one of the other interior spots, but he's also one that could come on a cheaper deal as well for them. Then you look at the other side of the ball in free agency, like I mentioned, how this could be a very intriguing class of free agents in 2025. You start with guys like Josh Sweat, who could come in for them. Hassan Reddick could be another one. Milton Williams, and a lot of people might not know that name, but he's a defensive tackle for the Eagles, and he's a very good run stopper. He does a lot of the intangible things in the middle of that defensive line that go unnoticed, and I think he could be a nice addition. Oza Odighizuwa, I think, is going to be a popular name, not only with the Bears and improving their defensive line, but also I've heard the Commanders could be very interested in him with the connection to Dan Quinn and everything like that. Whoever gets him, he's been one of the bright spots for the Cowboys, and he's a free agent this year. So if the Bears or the Commanders could get him, would be a huge upgrade for them at that spot as well. And the Bears have, room to maneuver in free agency. They have the 6th most cap space at nearly $63 million to kind of work with here. So I'm hoping that they take advantage of that and make some moves and are aggressive in free agency, because I think that's what they need, honestly. So they could do that in free agency, but also, in the draft, they have the 10th overall pick. And around that spot, you got guys like Will Campbell from LSU, Tyler Booker, the guard from Alabama, who could be another option for them. Maybe Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, but that might be a little bit too optimistic for him to be there at number 10. But you never know. I mean, that could be a spot too also. I'm expecting them to draft a lineman of some sorts with their first overall pick. So it's going to be someone, but who it actually will be, that depends on who's going to be there. I don't think they'll trade up or anything like that, but there's a ton of great opportunities this year to upgrade the trenches, it feels like, for the Bears. So I'm hoping they take advantage of it and are not like too bashful or kind of shy about going out there and upgrading. Like, go out there and be the first one to sign someone, right? Sign someone to a massive deal. If it's someone like Trey Smith, I don't have a problem with it at all, right? They need to find themselves in a spot where they upgrade that significantly so that they allow Ben Johnson, I think, to run the kind of offense, the kind of team that he wants to run in Chicago, right? Because they're very fortunate to have other pieces like Odunze, DJ Moore already there, Caleb Williams, DeAndre Swift, and a lot of good players on defense. So they just need all the, the foundational part of things, right? The foundation of a house, the tires on your car, right? These sort of things that you don't really think about too much, but the car or the house doesn't really work at all if you don't have these pieces. So that's why I think Chicago just really needs to focus on the trenches. It's their biggest need at this point in time, and if they could get that right, I'm not saying that they're going to jump to the top of the division, but we've saw them beat the Packers. We've seen them play close with the Vikings. We've seen them play close with the Lions. Like, I don't think that's just a coincidence by any means. I think they're right there. They have everything. They're just they were in a spot this past season where they weren't really led the right way, right? They didn't have that sort of guidance. So now that they do potentially have that, this could be an exciting team that could find everything that they need, hopefully, in free agency. So that's where I think the Bears should upgrade this coming off season. But we'll move on from that topic as of right now, and we got one more segment to get to on today's show. Just sort of a open discussion on the Buffalo Bills a little bit more, because their general manager Brandon Beane, made a comment last week that I thought was pretty interesting, and it made me think of this question, right? Are the Bills closer to the Kansas City Chiefs, and are they closer to just being around the conference title game each and every year, or are they closer to the rest of the field, right? Is it more unexpected at who's going to end up playing the Chiefs each and every year, or is it always just going to be the Bills, right? Are we always just going to assume it's going to be the Bills because it always feels like it is, right? I think that's a pretty interesting question that I came across, and we're going to answer it and just dive into it a little bit more to close out the show when we return. Thank you guys for joining me back here on today's show. And before we get into our discussion, we got to get to the latest piece of news that came across my phone. All right, so the breaking news, right? The news that I just came across my phone came from Cooper Kupp on a social media post regarding his future with the Los Angeles Rams, right? From his official account, Cooper Kupp said, "I was informed that the team will be seeking a trade immediately and will be working with me and my family to find the right place to continue competing for championships. I don't agree with the decision and always believed it was going to begin and end in Los Angeles. Still, if there's one thing, and remember, I have taken so much pride in playing alongside my teammates for the Los Angeles community, so thank you for embracing my family and making this such a special place for us. 2024 began with one of the best training camps of my career. Preparations start now for 2025. Highly motivated, as healthy as ever, and looking forward to playing elite football for years to come. Love you guys, but coming for it all." So, Cooper Kupp on the trade market officially. The Rams have informed him, apparently, that he will be on the move. When, where, who will it be? We don't have the answer to that obviously right now, but another piece of news, another announcement that I was not expecting. I don't know, I felt like this year wasn't the best for Cooper Kupp, and we're not going to go too much into it now, but yeah, I just felt like they had a decent thing going with Kupp and Puka Nacua, right? Puka definitely stepping more into that number one role, but I didn't think Kupp was just like unserviceable or anything like that. So, I don't know. They're going to explore some options, try to get something back from him now, and yeah, they could be in the market for a wide receiver potentially also with free agency and all the options that are out there. But with the last segment of today's show, I wanted to get to this topic, this question that came across my head because recently, obviously with Buffalo losing in the conference championship again, they aren't going to get over this loss quickly, so to say. You saw it on Josh Allen's expression and Brandon Beane, also their general manager, right, on how this team is supposedly moving on and things like that, and how close they keep getting, but not just getting over the hurdle completely over the last few years. And as you'd expect, one person who is remaining pretty high-spirited and pretty optimistic is their general manager in Brandon Beane, who spoke last week about how close he feels that the Bills are actually to actually doing this, and kind of highlighting the next season, right, a little bit in his statement that I have here for you guys, right? I thought it was pretty interesting, and we'll get to the question after I read it out, because he said, "Yes, we've now been to the AFC Championship twice. We've had some years where we fell short in the divisional round. We're right there, though. We're not getting blown out. If you tell me next year, I'll sign up for it. To be in the AFC Championship game, down 3 with 3 whatever to go in the game, and we got number 17, I'll sign up for that again and take our chances," right? And that was a question that was posed to him about, just continuing to kick on the door, continuing to knock on the door until you finally knock it down, right? Just keep knocking it until you kick the door down, right? And the Bills have been beating on this door for some time now, and they still aren't unable to walk through it, right? It seems, but their general manager is still remaining optimistic about it. So, I thought with that sort of mindset, right? It's the kind of mindset that you want to have, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. But I got to a place where I was thinking about this question, right? Because it feels like the Bills are obviously a very good team, that they have all the pieces, it seems like, to always be in this situation. But it made me think, like, are the Bills just like a lock, or are they just a guarantee to always be in this position, right? Are they the closest team to the Kansas City Chiefs to just always meet each other at the conference game each and every year? Or are we not talking enough about how are they just closer to the rest of the teams in the AFC in regards to who's going to make it out, right? Is it just more of a like a coin flip of who's going to make it out of the AFC to probably ultimately play the Chiefs, right? Are they closer to the field, or are they closer in terms of level of competition to the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Because it feels like being optimistic, and that's the way you're supposed to be, right? And Brandon Beane saying that they're just going to continue to knock on the door, knock on the door, knock on the door. Not a lot of teams get 4 opportunities to try and beat the same team and, just not get it done, right? Josh Allen's actually the only one to be 0-4 against one guy in the playoffs. So that's a lot of opportunities that not a lot of teams usually get. So it makes you think like the Bills are just closer to the Chiefs because they played so many times and it feels like they're always close games. But even though they end up losing, that you feel like their time is coming. But the biggest caveat with that is that you speak to anybody in the NFL and you speak to a lot of the players that have been in these situations, you just never really know how many more chances you're going to get. And that's why I thought this was so interesting, because the fact that the Bills, you can think that they're just going to try again next year, right? They're going to get them eventually. They're going to go back there again next year, but that's really not the case, especially when you're in the AFC, I believe, right? With like MVP caliber players like Lamar, Joe Burrow, good teams, just overall, right? Great quarterbacks in the AFC. It's no guarantee that you're going to be back there again just next year, right? So in terms of the question, I feel like the Bills are closer to the field than they are just directly with the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Right. I feel like they're very close, and like if they are to play against them, it'll be a great game and they'll have their opportunity, but you just never know when or if you're going to get that again or in any sort of close range to where you are right now, right? The quote that Dan Campbell gave last year, right, when they were in the NFC Championship game and they had the game right there, right? They had it in their grasp, but they let it go. He said after, like this could be the only time we ever make it here, right? That's a very true and a very real possibility, right? And then you look at them this year, right? They look a lot better, a lot more mature, a lot more experienced, the number 1 seed, and they lose in the first round, or their first opportunity, I should say, to play, and now they're out. They don't even make it back to where they thought they were going to be, a year where it looked like they were playing a lot better, but you just truly never know. And then in the AFC, I mean, the Bills, the Ravens with Lamar, Joe Burrow, he wasn't even in the playoffs, but I can't expect him to just be out of the playoffs each and every year. He's going to go back, and, in the playoffs, when you have a quarterback like that, it gives you an opportunity to beat anybody, right? He's one of the only ones to have beaten Patrick. He's the only quarterback actively to have beaten him in the playoffs. So you got to take that into account. Josh Allen and the Bills, it always feels like they're going to be there, but are they going to get over the hurdle of beating Patrick, right? And then you have Lamar and the Ravens that have, a lot of people would say that this year were better than the Bills, but they ended up losing this game. They've had their matchups against Patrick, but they've also come out short. I think all of them are a lot closer to themselves in their own group rather than any one being close to the Kansas City Chiefs, right? Because I think the Chiefs, I think it's a safe bet to say that they're always going to be probably at the AFC conference game each and every year, and I don't think the Bills are actually closer to them at all. I think it's the Chiefs, and then I think everybody else is down here. I don't think the Bills are really like the next best team right up to the Chiefs. I just don't know. I think there's a lot of uncertainty with something like that, and I think it's a lot more wide open because of the fact that we mentioned those teams, but then you also have teams like the Broncos who are ascending. They have a good young rookie quarterback and a great defense. The Chargers have another great defense. They have a good quarterback. They just need, hopefully, for the best of me, for everything, that they get some help around Justin Herbert, and I expect them to, so they're going to be a lot better. The Texans played pretty close with the Chiefs. If they didn't shoot themselves in the foot, who knows what would have happened with that game, right? And the Steelers are always there, but I don't want to get my hopes up. So you have a lot of decent teams in the AFC that will make a push for it. And I think it's become pretty evident, especially this year where the Chiefs were probably doubted as much, or at least as much as they were last year with the struggles they had last year, and then this year also being in all these close scored games, that I think it's shown us that it's really, again, the Chiefs, and then I think it's just everybody else. I don't think it's so much that the Bills are right there, so that they're always going to be right there, right? I think it's more of a crapshoot in that regard. Like, it's always going to be the Chiefs. You're always going to pick them out, but then it's just going to be like a random draw on who's going to play them in the AFC Championship game, right? I feel like that's where I stand on Brandon Beane's comments about, just continuing to knock on the door, knock on the door, knock on the door. You always want to have that mindset, but realistically, it's going to be very tough for them to just get back there again, right? I think the Ravens are going to get better. The Texans are going to get better. The Chargers are going to get better. The Bengals have to get better. I don't think they could play much worse. So it's going to be tougher, right? And I think the Bills had a great opportunity this year. That's why I made it seem like such an emphasis that it has to be this year, right? Like, this opportunity for them, they changed their identity. They made it a lot more run heavy, a lot more heavy personnel with the sole focus of beating the Chiefs, right? And the fact that they didn't get it done, it's hard to say that they can get that much better. Maybe they can improve at wide receiver or something like that, but it's hard to imagine they're going to get exponentially better like I think all these other teams can. Maybe other than the Ravens, but the Texans are going to get a lot better. And all the teams that I mentioned before, it's tough to imagine that for the Bills. So if you couldn't get it done now, right, there's no guarantee that you're going to have the exact same opportunity next year, right? So that's kind of where I stand on it. His comments made me think about are the Bills actually going to be there next year, right? They've had a lot of cracks at it. I don't know if they're just going to be there next year. It's a good mindset to have, but realistically, I don't know. I can't just confidently pick one of them. I think it could be any of them, of the Ravens, the Bengals, the Chargers, or any of those teams, quite honestly. So it wouldn't surprise me that any of those teams kind of make it out to play the Chiefs next year. So, that's kind of where I stand on that. And, that was the last challenge the Chiefs had to face in this playoffs. And now looking forward, we have the Super Bowl coming up this upcoming Sunday. So the rest of the week, I'm sure I'm going to incorporate some sort of thing around the Super Bowl. But for the time being right now, that is everything that we're going to get to on today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. And please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the Chip Shot Football Podcast, and follow the network on all forms of social media, obviously, but also checking out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, to catch more of this show and more coverage around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, joining you each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope to see you guys all back here again tomorrow, where we're going to discuss some more on Cooper Kupp, some more storylines around the NFL, and more things just on the National Football League when we come back again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.